So yeah, if I have to pause for a minute, it's because I'm letting somebody in and I can only see so many things at once. I am so excited to see so many people here and students and other faculty and alumni and everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. For those who don't know me, my name is Corinne Hughes. I'm the outreach coordinator at the Middle East Studies Center here at PSU. And today I have the honor and privilege to interview Diana Abu Jaber. But first, before I get into Diana, please make sure that your mics are muted throughout the program so we don't have, too many interruptions. Put your questions in the chat. We are definitely going to have time for a Q&A, the last half hour or so, and I'll moderate those questions, but we may be able to just sort of, have some conversation too. We don't have to keep it too formal. But I want to begin today to say a few words about this new series that we're trying to put together called Young Adult Literature in the Classroom. I was doing a little research, and young adult fiction is largely authored by writers who rarely represent characters and communities of color. According to the Cooperative Children's Book Center out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is in their School of Education, from 2018 to the present, including Diana's new book, Silverworld, there have been 56 books published with an Arab protagonist, and 32 of those were writers of Arab descent, including Diana. To put it another way, out of all the books that were studied by this center, less than 1% had Arab protagonists. So that being said, there is this momentum right now and commitment to increase the awareness of and access to more diverse young adult literature. But this change comes with challenges for educators, particularly to teach this literature that reflects cultures and communities with which they have less knowledge and experience personally. So this is really hard and risky work for an educator. The purpose of this new educator series is, yes, to raise awareness of these diverse books, to hopefully meet more authors. It's so wonderful when we can have an author to talk with, but it's also to explore these issues that teachers face with culturally affirming pedagogies. And so our next speaker, which will be after the new year, will be discussing research on educators trying to bring young adult literature with Muslim protagonists and the hardships that they face in doing that work. But today we have Diana Abu Jaber. Admitting someone. She is a beloved figure at Portland State University, Portland, Oregon, our region. Diana teaches in the English department here at PSU. Sorry, I'm like, when people ding to get in, I get distracted. She says after her parents asked her to recommend books about Arab American families, she wrote Silverworld. Fantasy with an Arab American girl at its heart, and it was just published this year by Crown Books and Random House. Diana often writes about the intersection of food, family, and cultural identity. Her memoir, Life Without a Recipe, was described by Ruth Reicke as bold and luscious. The Language of Baklava, her first memoir, has been published in many languages and won the Northwest Booksellers Award. Her latest novel, Birds of Paradise, won the Arab American National Book Award. Her other novels include Origin, Crescent, and Arabian Jazz. Fencing with the King, a novel of Middle Eastern intrigue and suspense, will be published in 2022 from W.W. Norton. So we'll be excited to have her back. So that's my introduction of Diana. We're going to start off with her reading an excerpt from the book, and then me and Diana are going to chat for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So let's start with me muting myself because of my race card. Okay.
All right. So I'm just going to read a short segment from Silverworld, and this is the opening of the book. So I'm going to not give you any setup. I'm just going to go right into it. The moon was flat and white as a witch's face. Sitti, I changed it from Sitti to Teta. Sitti leaned forward, her black eyes alight. I could hear the hooves of the Shwara desert raiders as they crossed the sands. All the others slept soundly in their tents. I was all alone. I was 12 years old, the only one who knew they were coming. Who, Sitti, who was coming? The Shwara tribe. Her eyes widened. Was your mother there? Why didn't you wake her? Sami whispered. Sitti threw out her arms. Light glanced on her silver necklace, and Sami caught a glimpse of one of the Bedouin tattoos that scrolled up her grandmother's arms. I tried, but we'd led our caravan all the way to Wadi Rum that day, miles over burning sand. Everyone was exhausted, and they were asleep. And these were no ordinary bandits. The Shwara were horrible. I knew they would take everything, every horse and goat, and worse. I'd heard the whispers that they stole children, sold them into slavery. I shook Omi. I tried. I called out, the bandits are coming. All she did was murmur and roll back to sleep. Oh, it was awful. I was so scared. Sami leaned back on her grandmother's soft silk carpet. The smell of jasmine and wild thyme faintly reached her from the shelves. What did you do? Even though she'd heard the story many times, she still felt breathless. For a moment, Sitti's face looked years younger. The light shifted, so her hair seemed to regain its black luster. She sat straighter. She adjusted her sapphire ring. I felt her. Ashrafia, Sami whispered. My double. I'd always known she existed. My great uncle, Sheikh Kashmir, had told me of her for years, but this was the first time I'd felt her deep in my center. What did she feel like? Like courage, like cunning, a powerful current rising up. Sitti placed one hand on her solar plexus, and Sami touched her own chest, feeling that some hidden something. And it felt like a voice, like it came from my own smartest self, speaking from deep inside a hidden world. She said to me, remember your training, Seraphia, call for an enchantment. An enchantment from the spell book, you mean? Sami asked. When can I see it? Are you 12 yet? Practically in just a few weeks. When you're 12, Sitti cut in. There are so many wonderful adventures ahead of you, as well as challenges, she nodded. Let's not rush into things. But I'm ready. I've been ready for ages, Sami muttered. And you're interrupting the story. Sitti shook her head. Listen, I crept out of the tent. They were heavy, very good for keeping out dust and noise. I always preferred sleeping under the stars. I stood, the raiders were coming, so near I could see the smoke of the horse's breath. I lifted my hands straight up. I was shaking, scared, but I heard my mother and my great uncle. I saw the enchantment spell on their lips many times, and I knew it by heart. I'd never spoken it out loud before, and I didn't know if it would work for me. Still, I shouted it out with all my might. And the bandits stopped, Sami said. Sitti nodded. Maybe 20 meters away. The ones who were jumping off their horses just flopped to the ground. Others fell asleep while they were still up in their horses, their headscarves unwinding. They were dreadful, these brutes. And the horses fell asleep too. Yes, Sitti said. I hadn't learned my own magicking strength yet. I didn't know how to control my spell casting, but then my uncle had risen. He was still wrapping his scarf over his head. He came out, looked at the raiders and said, Ya Allah, child, you have the touch of the Ifrit. And I'll stop there. That gives you a little taste of what's going on. So. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading. I think it'd be good to start with you telling us a little bit about what is Silverworld about?
Well, you get a little bit of a sense from that opening section. It's a lot of it is centered around the relationship between the grandmother and Sami. And I did change it to Teta rather than Sitti because She is meant to be, you want to come in? This is my daughter, Grace. Say hi.
Hi.
She's making a cameo appearance. Are you going to sit in?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. So you just want to come in. So, well, I wrote the book for her, so I guess it's appropriate that we have her appear in the.
See ya.
Okay, bye. Exhibit A. So it's this familial connection between Sami and her grandmother, and it's about her essentially having to come into her own, because this age that she's coming up to, 12 years old, is a really important age. It's about a child taking on her power, and in a large part of it is about claiming her cultural identity. She has to take on a magical adventure, a big magical challenge. But in the process of doing it, she has to grow up and she has to claim herself. And by claiming herself, that means claiming her heritage. So that's sort of the Cliff's Notes version of what happens. A lot more happens.
A majority of the book takes place in this world next door in Silverworld, which is home to flickers, rebalancers, shadows, and at one point, Ifrit. There's this mixture of the recognizable Middle Eastern fantasy, but there's also a lot that you created. So what did you draw from to create and develop the magic in this story?
Well, a lot of the magic is kind of a fusion, I would say. I grew up listening to fairy tales from both sides of my dinner table, which is my mother, who is Anglo, Irish Catholic, loved Hans Christian Andersen, the Brothers Grimm, traditional Anglo fairy tales. And then on the other side of the table were my father's stories. And he talked a lot about things like the Ifrit, spirits that inhabit other beings. He told a lot of stories about hauntings and possessions of various sorts. I think a lot of Americans are familiar with the jinn or genies, the idea of the magical being that drifts around and gets caught in various places and can take over a human, can actually attack a human being. So these creatures can be benevolent or they can be very terrifying and destructive. And I would say both of those things were true in both storytelling traditions, that these beings are sometimes very empowering. Uh-oh, did I freeze? Okay. Sometimes these creatures are very empowering and sometimes they are, and sometimes they will play tricks or do worse. So I was drawing basically from various kinds of resources. I've never made a formal study of fairy tales personally, but I feel like I grew up on them, hearing them so much that they kind of worked their way into my consciousness, if you will. Yeah.
Well, I think I know I told you before we talked today that I was so enthralled by the concept of the rotifer, if that's how you say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now I'm kind of remembering I wanted to show people here. I've stopped sharing, so I'm going to find an image of what a rotifer looks like. But while I'm doing that, can you talk a little bit about the development of that and inclusion of that in the story?
The rotifer was a really idiosyncratic kind of inclusion into the story. it's a rotifer is like a microscopic creature, basically. And if you're not familiar with it, my daughter had done a science excerpt in school on these tiny creatures, and one of them was a rotifer. And I became fascinated by the image of this creature. I started researching it online and looking at them, and the incredible complexity of this creature really struck me. It was beautiful and invisible, and part of this world that I was becoming very cognizant of as I was telling this fairy tale. I started thinking about how we're surrounded by invisible worlds, how there are creatures that inhabit. Oh, there you go. There you go. I mean, look at that. Look at that complexity. It's incredible, and it's minute. Um, and so I thought, we don't have to come up with crazy aliens or monsters or supernatural beings. The natural world around us is just as astounding as anything else. And so I decided I would uh, borrow from nature, and included the rotifer as a magical and all-powerful being in the story. And in Silverworld, he's huge, he's tremendous. He takes up enormous amount of space in the parallel world. So it's just one of those kinds of things that I think writers use to help you scale the differences in world building, which we do in fantasy. You have to come up with new details and new ways of measuring what is happening in the world. And one way to do it is to take something out of the real world and create a new way of seeing it, a new size for it, a new color for it, a new appearance for it. And then we have something to compare it to. And we understand some of the new dimensions of this unfamiliar world.
I love that.
Oh.
I just think it's so relevant right now to be doing work that's bringing all of that to the forefront.
Thank
There's
you.
so much again and again in the novel, this like an essence of advice that is so pertinent to young people and even to adults, which resonated so much with even me, on how to handle change and crisis, uncertainty. I love the theme of having a relationship with shadow beings.
Oh, yes.
And it's so relevant to this time we're in right now. And the advice is to calm your mind, to breathe, to connect to the things that bring you joy. And for Sami, that's so much about her family, which is beautiful. What do you hope readers take away from this?
Well, you mentioned in your introduction that I wrote Silverworld because people were asking me for people were asking me for recommendations. They would come up to me after readings and say, you know, I'm a parent, and I enjoy reading, grown-up books, but what do you have for my kids? What can you give me? And over I was hearing this from parents like my own parents who were mixed between cultures. So one might be American, one might be an immigrant, both might be immigrants, but trying to bridge between cultures. So they wanted books to help their kids make sense of what it means to try to either interconnect their identities or find ways of moving between worlds. And I realized that at the time, this is going back like 10 years now. At the time, I really didn't have much that I knew of. And I've been teaching Arabic literature, particularly in translation or written in English, Arab-American literature. I've been teaching that for a long time. So I was starting to think about it, and I really was surprised at what a struggle it was to think about this. So, and then becoming a mother myself, it becomes more urgent, and you start thinking about, how do I explain this to my kid? How do I help my own child make this transition? Because I know I did. I know I struggled with it. Growing up in my family, um, I drew the Irish Catholic appearance card. My sisters drew the Arab appearance card, and we all had different experiences within the same family. So that was challenging. It was all difficult. So this is a very long-winded response, but this is what I wanted. I wanted a book that would help kids feel okay, to read about a young person, particularly a young girl. I wanted it to be from a girl's perspective. I wanted her to be heroic. I wanted her to learn how to be brave. And I wanted her to feel proud, to feel like, this culture is amazing. And to be born between cultures is a gift. It's not something that diminishes you, because people will make you feel that way. People will make you feel like you're not enough. You're not fully American. You're not fully Arab. You're not, valid in and of yourself. So I would really like children to be able to read this and feel like, not only am I enough, I am double. Yeah. I got both things, to feel the gift that it is to be born between places and to feel pride in that. So there you go. That's all.
Nothing complicated. That's beautiful.
Thank you, Corinne. Yeah.
I know. I'm like, I want to say you did it, but I am white. But
I hope so.
It's a stunning book, and I think you have accomplished exactly what you set out to do.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think a lot of us, even if we're not born between cultures or immigrants, I think Americans, we all have this, no matter what our cultural background, because we are a nation at some point, unless our great ancestors were indigenous peoples. We are a nation of immigrants, and so in some way we can all connect with the feeling of the fragmentation. Yeah.
What advice do you have for other writers out there who are writing stories, that they're trying to represent themselves personally in these complex topics?
It's tough. It's a challenging yet immensely rewarding field, and it's an incredible privilege to get to write, to put your words down on the screen or on paper. I think it's one of the greatest callings any of us get to do. But you have to hold on to that, because it's also the most painful. And I tell my students that your writing, it often is going to be powered by adversity, pain, struggles, hardship. Your pain is expensive, and it's precious because it's expensive. Your pain is perhaps the most precious thing you own. And so we need to learn how to value it, to honor it, and to sit with it in the ways that you need to in order to write out of real experience. my students this morning were talking about how so many of them feel pressured by the very, very many ways of writing and reading and communicating that we have now. Social media, fan fiction, great TV programming, film, video, it's just exploded. And so a lot of them feel overwhelmed by this. And writing asks you to go slow and to be quiet and thoughtful and inside yourself. And there isn't much support for those of us who need and want to do it. You need to do time doing nothing. And our culture doesn't value that because it's not really very easy to quantify. You can spend years writing a book and not have anything to show for it, including publication at the end of it. I will say that of the, I don't know how many books I've written, of the 7 or 8 books I've published now, I've written almost another book, a shadow book that was not published. So it's something that requires determination above all. And maybe that's hard to hear, but I think to me, it's encouraging because it's not about being born with some magic sign over your head. It's not about being connected. It's not about being wealthy. Yes, those things help. But I wasn't born with any of those things. I wasn't born with any advantages at all, quite the reverse. And I know that if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's simply a matter of being determined and to embrace those moments when you're told no, and to let those moments fuel yourself to go forward and to try even harder to keep going. So that is I hope that doesn't sound dark. I want it to sound inspiring, but there's darkness in there.
I think it's perfect. I'm like, it's so true. And I think it can transcend to other endeavors as well. It's just
right.
a really wonderful response. Oh. If there are any writers in the audience, yes, I hope they heard.
Yes.
I'm now going to go over to the chat room and see what participants have for you to answer. First of all, from Owen, what time period is the novel set in, if it has a specific one?
It's I'm not sure it really specifies a time period. It's meant to be contemporary, so it's essentially set in the 2000s. And I wrote it over about a period of 10 years. I mean, this thing took me a long time to write. So I would say it's set in the sort of contemporary present tense is how I would put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There aren't like a lot of markers there. I don't mention who's president or anything like that. I was trying to get it as contemporary as I could without dating it, because as soon as you put those markers in, then you click your place in time, and that sets it. Yeah.
Okay, next, from Mehmet Gultigan. I recently got my doctoral degree and wrote my dissertation on the Middle East Outreach Council Book Awards. Congrats.
Congratulations.
Amazing. There are a number of questions, so I'll go through. I wonder your position about insider and outsider authors.
I don't know. That's such an interesting designation. Insider and outsider authors. If Mehmet is here, maybe she could say something more about that, um, because I'm not sure I know what that refers to. But that shows you, I bet, that I'm an outsider. I bet that's what that shows.
I don't know. My interpretation was like, if you're Arab and you're going to write an Arab protagonist versus if you're not Arab and you write an Arab protagonist. Is that okay?
Okay. Should we go with that? Maybe we should go with that.
Maybe I can speak up, but yeah.
Oh, here. Yes. So if you are of the culture that you're writing about. Okay. Wow, that's a hard question. Boy. I struggle with it, and I get asked about that from time to time, because uh, in my own experience, and this also relates to the idea of being between cultures too. Like, when I first started writing, I really struggled with the idea of whether I was enough of an authority. Here I was, I happened to be this kid of an Arab American household, but I wasn't like an expert. I hadn't studied political theory. I didn't know the history of the region. Um, so I felt very unqualified in a way, but I knew that I had a story, that I had lived a story. And so what I did was I told the story that was closest to my experience in my first book. And that book is called Arabian Jazz. And I just really played it what I would call safe. I talked about daughters who were being raised in this mixed cultural household, and how the father is obsessed with getting them married, which is very true to life. And I kind of just told that story, and I wasn't at all certain that I qualified, or that anyone would be interested, for that matter, in what I had to say. And it was really interesting when they sent my book out. One of the first publishers who saw it at this, a big publishing house, said that she liked my writing, but that she felt that Arabs were politically inappropriate. And so I didn't know what that meant. I was shocked, and dismayed, and I didn't know if all the publishers were going to say that. And I was being told that it didn't matter if I was qualified or not, if I was inside enough or not, that I was already being rejected. So that was very instructive to me. And I learned from that we have to claim our voices and we have to claim our own authority, and that we all own our stories and we have the right to tell those stories. Now, does somebody who's completely outside the culture have the right to tell an inside story? I think it gets more complicated and murkier and puzzling. How specific do we want to go? Does someone only have the right to tell the story of being a 49-and-a-half-year-old from southern Jersey with one child and a greyhound? And how limiting do we want to make it? I guess the problem is that writing from the perspective that you haven't earned, in a sense, can feel like a form of co-optation and even a form of theft. And I see this particularly because I study food. When I see menus and restaurants that use foods from, I'm just going to talk about what I've been thinking about, Palestinian culture, and it's rebranded as Israeli. you know, and Israeli cooks and eaters may have spent their whole lives growing up eating this food and identifying with it. So for them, it does feel Israeli. But for the Palestinians, these traditional preparations can feel very much like a part of their heritage. And so when they see it described as belonging to another nation, particularly a nation that's occupying them, it feels like a form of theft. And so I guess that's where it gets complicated and emotional. And unfortunately, I can't give a really satisfying answer. I can only say that we each have to respond to that question in our own way and kind of make our decisions, our personal decisions around it. But I think it's a good question to ask, and it's an important one, because it's so much about our history and showing respect for the experiences of people who may not have had a chance to represent themselves in their own voices. Yeah.
That was great. Thank you for that.
Yes.
We did kind of touch on, you know, how you were putting together the fantasy, the magic, but what made you want to take this angle for the story, like doing a fantasy? Mehmet says that there's only been one fantasy book in the Middle East Outreach Council Book Awards. So it's kind of unique.
That is interesting. I didn't know that, actually. You know, fantasy it's always felt a little bit edgy to me, I guess, because of my father. You know, my father is Muslim, and so the ifrits and the demons are not completely acceptable. They're other, and they're seen as very dangerous and taboo. And so I love that, you know, that immediately, that's where I want to go. I've always been that way. I've always had that thing. My Jordanian grandmother said that was the Irish in me. So yeah. Actually, what she said was that was the Irish demon in me. So I've always had that kind of impulse to go to those places. And I've always been fascinated by magic. To me, talking about the experience of being between cultures and identities feels magical, because you're always creating something. You are creating a new cultural perspective. You can't really fall back completely on one or the other. And that joining of different identities, in my case, American and Arab, to me echoes so much of the fusion that happens in fantasy, in which you have magical beings that are part one and part the other. You know, the Ifrit is sort of echoes like mermaids and selkies and creatures like this that are part fish, part human, part animal, part angel. The burak, the horse that flies Muhammad, the woman, the horse, the wings, that assemblage of different beings coming together is profoundly magical. And so for me, it really spoke to my own experience and what I saw around me, not just my own, but that of my cousins and the people that we associated with, that we were all in that state of becoming by putting together different ways of being in the world. And we could either find a way to join them and thrive, or try to kill off that other piece of ourselves. And then what happens when you do that?
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. Mehmet has more questions, but I'm going to move on for the sake of time. And if we have time at the end, I'll come back or can reach out to you via email as well. But so let me see who. Barbara Reyes asks, can you describe any religious, spiritual tensions you may have encountered in your life and how this showed up in your writing?
Interesting. Well, definitely there were religious tensions when I was growing up because of such powerfully established religions. My grandmother on my mother's side was a very devout Catholic. I mean, just really devout. And so it was very important to her that we were raised Catholic. And I did go to a Catholic school for the first several years of my life. And we moved to Jordan. The first time we moved to Jordan, I was 7 years old, and I went to a French Catholic school in Jordan. And the nuns at the school forbade the speaking of Arabic. They would say that, how did they put it? I remember our teacher, Sister Marie France, would say, French was the language of the angels, and English was the language of mortals, and Arabic was the language of animals. Yes, they would tell this classroom of little girls this, just delightful. Colonization at its best. And if a child was caught speaking Arabic, they would hit them with a ruler. So that didn't mess me up at all. And that was a really powerful influence in my early years growing up. I felt like we were supposed to be Catholic because that's where we attended religious services. But then my father was doing this other thing completely separately. And it was complicated by the fact that he was a convert to Islam. He had grown up in his home. It was a Syrian Orthodox household. And the Abu Jabbers in this part of Amman were Christians. So he converted to Islam as a young man, and he would kind of practice almost secretly in this one part of our house. And he would put on white robes, and he would wash, and he would read from the Quran. But we just kind of didn't participate in it. It was all very strange. And I think I've seen different couples do different things where one of them has one religion, the other has the other, and the children are in between. This was my parents' way of coping, that they kept it separate. And my mother actually ended up repudiating Catholicism. She calls herself a recovering Catholic. And when we moved away from my grandmother, she stopped attending church completely. So I ended up from age, I would say 12 on, growing up in a completely religion-free zone. And it was a stark contrast to what came before. And what we kind of ended up saying, my dad just would tell us, I don't care what religion you follow, as long as you have faith in something larger than yourself. That was his, his separate piece. And it was one that I took to heart. So that's my religion now. Yeah.
This idea of the in-betweenness, it seems to reflect not only, like religion, identity. How much was this impacting how you approach the story?
Corinne, could you rephrase that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking about how it is a question that was on Mehmet's mind too. I'm not sure if you're familiar to the term in-betweenness, but I wonder your story's relation to this term. And in your book, there is so much a physicality, not just between like this world and the other world. There's like a physicality that's happening between, characters and shadows. A complexity to it that seems like it's geographical. I can hear it in how you talk about, these religion and identity.
Yeah.
And sort of feeling a tug or a pull. I don't know. So
Yeah. It is a real thing. It's not a place. It's a state of being, I would say. It's, oh, did I freeze? Oh, there I am. Okay. It's sort of like talking on Zoom. You're neither here nor there. You're kind of in the in-between zone. And so it's a mirror, I think. That's how Silverworld got started. My parents were living in a condo that was lined with mirrors, very 70s. And my niece was visiting. She was there for about a month, and we needed a way to entertain her because she wasn't allowed to watch TV. So, and this was going back about, gosh, maybe 12 years. So she was very young. She was about 6, 7 years old. And I started telling her a story about the people who lived in the mirror. And the people in the mirror were, we call them reflections, but actually they're people. And those lights that we see are signals that they're sending us. And those flashes and those colors, those are all coming from their parallel world. And I started spinning out this story of this parallel universe, this place that exists in tandem with ours, so that there are two sides, and that in a way the in-between exists between the world that we know and the world within the mirror. But to me, the parallel, if you can call it that, in real life, is there's two worlds when you're an immigrant. There's your life before and there's your life after. For some of us, there are many, but let's just say you are an immigrant who came from one culture into the United States. It's almost like your life cracks in half. And I saw this with my father very clearly, that he had the life before, and we kind of knew it, but we didn't really know it. We knew it in shadows. We knew it in murky kinds of suggestions. We had partial memories. We had the things he chose to tell us, and we also had the silences that he did not share with us. We had both of those things. And that life before, while I was a child, that life before didn't really seem to count. It didn't seem real. But as I grew up and we all became older, I started to feel like the life before almost took over the life now, and took on a life of its own, in which my father constantly talked about and longed for the life he couldn't have. We moved to Jordan several times when I was growing up, and we would be there anywhere from a couple years to a few months. And every time we moved to Jordan, my father would start longing for the United States. And I realized that he was tragically caught in between, and that he would never, ever have a place to stop and feel like himself, fully himself. And so to me, that's the story behind the story, that we are continually longing for. We're in a place and we're continually longing for, or thinking of, or projecting ourselves into another place. Just a theory.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Our next questions from Yasmin Hanoush. This one's cool. How do you strategically select which Arabic words to introduce in an English language literary work? Do you deliberate a lot about how much to foreignize the host language, English, and how much to domesticate the source language, culture, Arabic? What implied reader do you have in mind when you write? Someone with some familiarity with Arab Americans, or someone who has to learn everything about the culture from your text?
Oh, Yasmin, yabaye. It is really, that is such a hard question. And it changes, for me, it changes with every book. You know, the book that I just finished writing that hasn't come out yet, Fencing with the King, that one, I have a lot of Arabic in that book. And I didn't want to put it in italics because I started to feel like italics diminishes, italics others the language. But if you don't have it in italics, how confusing is it going to be to the reader? That is still an unanswered question in the publication of this new book. It's still in discussion, where the publisher is pushing for italics and I'm holding out for not italics. But I understand why we make these kinds of divisions. There is some Arabic in Silverworld, not a lot. And, you know, part of my concern is that it can feel like its own form of tokenizing. Well, if I throw in a bunch of, you know, buenos dias, you know, suddenly I'm Spanish. No, you know, that doesn't do it. With my first book, I had the characters speak with a kind of dialect, and it was meant to mimic the accent of my cousins and my relatives. Oh, my dog is barking now. And that was just not satisfying because I felt like it ended up feeling like it was somehow undermining the way they spoke. So I haven't come up with a really satisfying answer to that issue. It's something that I think anyone who is dealing with more than one language or speakers with more than one language has to confront. And my own take has been to move toward more Arabic rather than less, but we'll see if I'm allowed to do that.
That was great. It was a great response. Great question. If anybody else has any questions or wants to say anything, there's definitely lots in the chat for you, Diana, to look through.
Excellent.
Thank yous and things that resonated.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. I so appreciate it. And it's exciting for me to get to talk about Silverworld. You know, it means a lot to me because it is my first book for younger readers. And, you know, every book is kind of that question mark anyway, but to try on a really, you know, radically different genre, it's scary. It's scary. And younger readers, they're tough. They'll tell you what they think. They don't just, you know, they don't come up to you and say, oh, I love it. They'll come up to you and say, I did not like this. Yeah, someone did. He was 8. He did not like it. There were too many shadows in this book, and it was scary. And that's something I've been accused of. Too scary.
Do you think you'll do another young adult?
I hope so. I have another idea for a new book. I don't think I will at this point, it's not in the fantasy genre. It's more of a real life story. But I'd really like to write this one. Um, I might have to wait till my next sabbatical though. So we'll just wait on that a little bit longer.
Well, one book at a time.
That's right. That's
Or
right.
two.
One book at a time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out.
Yes.
Feel free to reach out to me for anything. This was recorded. I'm going to clip it, and I can share it if you'd like to watch it again or share it with people. And we'll let everyone know where we end up putting it online.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Corinne. And thank you, everyone. It was great seeing so many familiar faces and old friends and young friends.
Nice to see you, Diana.
Great to see you too. Oh, it's so fun, you guys. Bye. Hi, Jean. Yay. Meant to say, I'm so happy to see you. Hey, Elizabeth. Thank you for coming. Gosh, you guys. Aww.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for coming, Tom.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
Aww. Much appreciated. Oh, bye. Bye, Elizabeth. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Oh, gosh. That was fun. Thank you so much, Corinne. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. This was great.
Oh, thank
Great
you.
turnout. Just, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Really intense questions. That's good.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, very, very. I'm just now glancing over at all the wonderful stuff people have written, and all the, gosh, people wrote a lot. Look at that.
Yeah, I'll save the chat. I can make sure you get these too.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, that would be really neat. And I'm really glad people ask questions. And thank you for your questions. I loved what you asked. It was just right, just exactly in the directions that I'm working in. So
great.
Yeah,
great.
you really nailed
that is
it.
my first time interviewing an author, so I hope. Yeah, I was trying to be right.
Yeah. Just beautifully done. And thank you for saving me with that inside outside author question. I really drew a blank.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of contention with that issue. So some authors have extremely strong feelings about it, and some don't.
Gosh. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's a super tough one, but I won't forget. Inside, outside. Okay.
Yeah. Do you write every day? Or are you like, you sound like the kind of writer that's not like, I do word counts. The way you were talking about writing, I was like, you do time, and maybe you write, and maybe you go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was just on a sabbatical this past year, and yeah, during that time I wrote like every day. I worked every day, like just jammed on it. But during the school term, like I have done zero. I mean, literally since the day classes started, that's it. It just
too much.
No, I got to put it aside, and it's okay. It works out with the flexibility of school, where, when the Christmas break happens, there's a chunk of time, but really it's what I do over summer. That's what summers are for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's all writers have to figure out how to do it. And some people can like you know, our department chair, our former department chair, Paul Collins, he was able to like be the chair and teach and write, and he was able to do it, but he's like a machine.
Right?
You know, no, I, for me, teaching, preparing lessons, and reading student work, it's just, it's everything. So, but it's okay. It's okay. You know, you kind of work out your arrangements, you do it. And I'm not one of these people that does like, you know, sits down for 3 hours and only writes for 3 hours. I
Mhm.
can't do that. I'm,
Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
more like I write at the dentist office before I go in for the appointment.
Wow. I love meeting writers that are like that. For some odd reason, they don't seem like the ones that get interviewed the most.
Right,
You
yeah.
know, you only hear from
Right.
writers that are very like systematic, had a full
Yeah.
outline.
Yeah.
Like, what? Are you sure?
Yeah, I know.
You work with the MFA program, or do you teach just all around with writing?
I do teach in the MFA program. Like right now I'm teaching, it's a nonfiction class. I'm teaching a memoir. It's a culinary memoir class. So it's all food writers, you know, it's a blast. It's so much fun. And then usually like I'm also teaching the undergraduate fiction students. So I kind of I'm in the English department, but I teach for the MFA students. And then, you know, I've been teaching my Arab-American lit classes for years. So that's a really important piece of it for me. I love, if I could just switch over completely to teaching Arabic literature, that's what I would do.
Wow.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's my favorite thing to teach. It's
Yeah,
like,
you and then Yasmin's folktale class. Those are the only two, right?
yeah. There is not a ton that I know of. I shouldn't say that so
Yeah.
assuredly, but
Yeah, it did happen recently that I found one more faculty member with a Middle East perspective in architecture, and I was like, what? I thought I found all of them. You know, there's always like another one popping up.
Right. Yeah, we're like hidden away out there. I was really impressed when you said you found, what was it, 32 books from an Arab.
Oh yeah.
I was impressed. I didn't know that there were that
I was impressed
many.
with that number two because I thought it would be less.
Yes.
And I saw that and I was like, well, I mean, 32 out of 56. I mean, that's
yep.
Insider writers.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Insider writers. Yeah.
Our next speaker is, I found this professor at CU Boulder, so Colorado University Boulder, who's in the College of Education, who researches young adult literature with Muslim protagonists and how teachers, they bring in these books with good intentions and it usually blows up in their face.
Wow.
Kind of about why that happens and how they weren't prepared as pre-service teachers. And I was just like, we gotta have you talk. I've never heard anything like this.
Wow.
So, yeah, I can let you know when that happens. I mean,
I would love to know. That sounds amazing.
I couldn't believe someone with that focus. It's just so cool.
That's awesome. It shows you how sensitive this stuff is and how loaded it's become. I think about, you know, the contrast of when I was growing up and the only Arab literature in English, you know, that I could find as a young person was like Khalil Gibran, you know, yeah. I mean, literally, I discovered Naomi Shihab Nye when I was in college. And that was like, for me, that was the first, you know, I was so excited when I discovered her work. But she was like the first one for me. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was on the list in the past 2 years. I'm like, she's always publishing.
Yeah, she's a machine. She's one of those like every day, you know. but I don't think she teaches. So that's how I justify it to myself. I'm like, okay,
Right?
it's okay.
Yeah, when I've worked with educators, they are so scared to teach, you know, anything that would have anything to do with Islam or anything to do with
Oh.
Israel. They are just like, not with a 10-foot pole am I going in there. And we're like, come on.
Yeah, right. Please.
Don't be like
please.
that. Don't be
Right.
scared. It's okay.
So frustrating.
That was something I like so much about your book, though, about it, that I think can resonate, like, even with a teacher, that sort of like, just breathe, calm down.
Yeah, right.
This is uncomfortable. It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. Breathe. Yeah. You will be okay.
You're gonna be uncomfortable. You're gonna make a mistake.
Right. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's sort of like, never mind being an inside or outside writer, but being an inside or outside teacher then. It's like,
You just like blew my mind.
right? It's like the next level of anxiety that we're dealing with. And what a bummer if people start feeling like, you know, I have to have some kind of inside knowledge in order to teach it. Then
they feel like they have to be an expert. And if they're not the expert, and that's put on them in like pre-service. Don't even get me started. I'm thinking about getting a PhD now because of all of this. And that was not on my list.
You should.
But I'm like getting obsessed.
Oh, that's awesome. I hope you will. I love that idea. It's
really
so
inspiring.
important. Yeah, that's, it's striking me now, like the classes that I speak to are usually run by Arab faculty. Huh. I'm seeing a pattern. Wow. I've never really
because they're like more comfortable teaching the books.
Yeah. Wow.
But then if you think about how many white teachers there are.
Right.
No,
it's
and even
very,
with these like cultural heritage months, like nope, it's not good enough.
yeah. See, that happened with my novel. Which one was it? Birds of Paradise. It was one of my last novels, and my publisher said that they heard from a bookseller that they didn't want to put it out because they were afraid that it was going to be this dark Muslim jihadist thing with the word paradise and my last name, and they'd read all this stuff into it, and there was all this anxiety around it. And I think it's like Americans approach so much of Middle Eastern content with this anxiety and this estrangement that always keeps it at arm's length. And it's such a disservice to all of us, you know. It makes it so difficult to get the word out. So, oh
my gosh, that's like a whole other thing. The booksellers.
Right there. Yeah.
I love it when I see like Arab writers and it's like a whole shelf. I'm like,
oh, yes.
Here. Do it. Ooh, Arab women writers. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And I have to see that in Chicago.
Oh, yes. Cool. Yes. It's so important. It's so important. You know, it's an ongoing struggle. And I will say that, you know, things have changed so much. You know, when that first novel got sent out, you know, and that editor made that comment about Arabs not being politically appropriate, you know, that was back in the 90s. And things have really changed. Things have, I see it in my own lifetime. I see things opening up and just getting more and more and more. And, you know, I take heart from that. I feel like it's happening. It's not an explosion, but it's definitely happening. So
yeah,
we just have to hang in there.
Just keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good for your daughter.
I know. That was so funny. I didn't know she was gonna do that. What?
It's like, hey, I'm on TV.
Woohoo! I'm 11. Yeah.
I'd do that.
I'm here now. Yeah, she is a pill. Oh my gosh.
Oh, is she at home? I don't know what it's like in
Yes.
Florida. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yay.
Online learning. Yeah. Yeah. So this all seems very familiar to her. She's like, oh, and she heard we were doing this. She's like, are you going to use Crowdcast? Are you going to do blah, 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 blah? I'm like, I don't know.
We should have done something fancy maybe next time. I'm still learning.
Oh, you're way ahead of me. I'm like, oh, images. Oh my gosh, right. Pictures of stuff. That's so great. That was awesome. Thank you so much for putting those images up.
Rotifer.
Yeah.
I like want a Rotifer doll now.
Right? I know. That would be so cool. That would be an amazing thing, actually. A Rotifer doll.
That was like the star for me. I was just like, this is so
Right,
cool.
yeah.
Science. Yes. Yeah.
Rules.
Well, I can let you go.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
such a pleasure meeting you. And
Oh,
doing
same
this.
here.
I
Yeah.
will be in touch with the video and the chat and stuff like that. So
Awesome.
feel free to
All
be in
right.
touch and take care.
Thank you. You too, Corinne. Thank you again. That was wonderful. I so enjoyed it.
Oh,
So,
I'm glad.
all right. All right. More soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.